Think about the last time you felt overwhelmed by stress or frustration. Maybe it was a tough day at work, a difficult conversation, or just the constant noise of modern life. In moments like these, emotional stability can feel like something you either have or you don't, a fixed trait, almost like height or eye color. But what if that isn't true? What if centuries ago, emotional stability wasn't just a vague idea or a personality quirk, but a measurable, trainable skill, something you could practice, strengthen, and even master? In ancient societies, from Rome to Greece, this wasn't a theoretical concept. It was a core part of education, leadership, and daily life. People didn't just hope for calm, they built it deliberately through discipline and practice. Marcus Aurelius, one of history's most thoughtful leaders, put it perfectly when he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That idea that inner strength is something we cultivate, not something we stumble upon, is at the heart of Stoicism, a philosophy that treated emotional resilience not as a mystery, but as a science of the soul. Today, we often treat our emotions as if they're entirely outside our control, like weather patterns we simply have to endure. We might try to manage stress with shortcuts or distractions, but rarely do we consider that our emotional responses can be shaped, refined, and mastered through consistent effort. The ancient Stoics, however, saw things differently. They believed that emotions weren't forces to be suppressed or ignored, but energies to be understood and directed. Principles like cognitive detachment, the ability to observe your feelings without being ruled by them, were not abstract ideals. They were practical tools exercised daily through reflection, meditation, and mindful action. Resilience wasn't a lucky trait, it was a habit. Presence wasn't an accident, it was a practice. In a world that often feels increasingly chaotic, these ancient approaches to emotional stability aren't just historical curiosities, they're urgently relevant. So let me ask you this: what if your emotional stability could be trained like a muscle? What if you could respond to challenges not with anxiety or anger, but with clarity and composure? This video is going to explore how ancient societies did exactly that, how they turned emotional mastery into a tangible, measurable skill. We'll dive into Stoic principles that have stood the test of time, and we'll see how you can apply them in your own life. From the mental frameworks used by Roman emperors to the daily rituals of ordinary citizens, we're about to uncover a forgotten art, the art of building unshakable inner calm. This isn't just philosophy, it's a practical guide to living with more strength, purpose, and peace. And it all starts with a shift in perspective, one that people thousands of years ago already understood better than many of us do today. In Stoic philosophy, emotional stability wasn't a vague ideal, it was a disciplined practice. It required daily effort, constant self-awareness, and a commitment to examining one's own mind. The Stoics didn't believe in suppressing feelings or pretending they didn't exist. Instead, they saw emotions as natural reactions that stem from our judgments about the world. A sudden wave of anger isn't just an uncontrollable force that hits you. It's a signal that you've made a judgment, that something outside of you has wronged you in a way that demands an emotional response. The key to Stoic mastery was learning to pause in that space between the event and your reaction, to question that initial judgment before allowing it to dictate your behavior. This is where true emotional control is born, not from numbness but from understanding. This approach is perfectly captured in the words of the Stoic teacher Epictetus, who was born a slave and gained his freedom through philosophy. He drew a crucial line that became the foundation of this entire practice. He said, Some things are within our power, while others are not within our power. Within our power are our own opinions, impulses, desires, and aversions essentially, our internal world and how we choose to respond. Everything else, our property, our reputation, our health, even what other people say and do, is not within our power. Emotional turmoil, the Stoics argued, almost always arises from confusing these two categories. We waste energy being upset by things we cannot change, while neglecting the one thing we can always control, our own judgment and response. This wasn't just theoretical advice, it was a measurable standard, especially for those in positions of power. In ancient Rome, a leader's worth was often judged less by their victories and more by their composure in the face of disaster. Imagine a general receiving news that his supply lines have been cut, leaving his army stranded. A poor leader might be ruled by panic, making rash decisions fueled by fear. A Stoic leader, however, would be trained to see this event for what it is, an external circumstance outside his complete control. His duty wasn't to wish the situation were different, but to assess it calmly, focus only on the actions available to him, and execute them with clarity. His emotional stability was a direct reflection of his ability to apply this dichotomy of control, and his peers would evaluate him on it. This composure was a visible, tangible skill that inspired confidence and order in times of chaos. So let's bring this ancient lens to a modern moment. Think back to a recent time when you felt a strong negative emotion, frustration in traffic, hurt from a comment, anxiety about a work deadline. In that moment, how much of your reaction was focused on things entirely outside of your control? The other driver's behavior, another person's words, the demands of a project. Now consider the alternative. What if, in that same situation, you had consciously redirected your attention to what was within your power? Your breathing, your interpretation of the event, your next words, your next action. How might shifting your focus from what you can't control to what you can fundamentally change the outcome of that entire experience? In ancient Athens, emotional resilience wasn't an extracurricular option or a self-help trend. It was a fundamental part of a citizen's core curriculum. From a young age, children of citizens were immersed in an educational system designed to produce not just knowledgeable individuals, but well-rounded, virtuous, and emotionally steady members of the polis. This holistic approach wove together physical training, musical arts, rigorous philosophy, and the precise skill of rhetoric. Each component served a dual purpose: to inform the mind and to fortify the character. The goal was to create a person who could face the uncertainties of life, the pressures of public debate, and the horrors of war without being overthrown by their own passions. It was understood that a stable society required stable individuals, and that stability had to be consciously built layer by layer through deliberate practice. This early training in virtue and emotional control is something the Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote about with great conviction. In his letters, he emphasized that the foundation for a resilient character must be laid young, before bad habits and unchecked emotions take root. He argued that the mind is most pliable in youth, making it the perfect time to instill the principles of rational judgment and self-discipline. Seneca believed that learning to navigate small disturbances, a lost toy, a harsh word from a teacher, was the training ground for handling life's greater adversities later on. Without this early formation, he warned, a person would be at the mercy of every passing feeling, like a ship without a rudder in a stormy sea. The ancient classroom was, in many ways, a laboratory for emotional strength. We see this philosophy pushed to its extreme in the famous Spartan Agoge, the notoriously harsh education system designed to produce unwavering soldiers. Boys were taken from their homes at age 7 to live in communal barracks where they endured physical hardship, food shortages, and intense competitive drills. The purpose was to systematically desensitize them to fear, pain, and discomfort, forging a resilience that was both mental and physical. Their emotional stability was measured directly by their ability to endure suffering without complaint and to function as a cohesive unit under extreme duress. Similarly, in Rome, a young boy's education, often at a school called a ludus, involved not only reading and writing but also lessons in endurance, duty, and public bearing. He was taught to model his behavior on the great Stoic and heroic figures of the past, learning that his composure was a reflection of his family's honor and his own future role as a leader. When we contrast this with the overwhelming focus of most modern education systems, a significant gap becomes apparent. Today, we prioritize the accumulation of information, technical skills, and standardized test scores above almost all else. We teach children what to think, inundating them with data, but we spend remarkably little time teaching them how to think, how to manage the inevitable anxiety of failure, how to navigate social conflict with equanimity, how to process disappointment without collapsing into despair, or how to cultivate patience and perseverance in the face of long-term challenges. We expect emotional intelligence to develop naturally, as if by accident, rather than treating it as a core skill that requires the same structured teaching and practice as mathematics or literature. So let's turn that observation inward for a moment. Looking back on your own formal education, whether it was recent or many years ago, can you identify any dedicated, structured effort to train your emotional responses? Were you ever explicitly taught how to sit with discomfort, to question your initial judgments, or to separate what you can control from what you cannot? For most of us, the answer is no. We were left to figure out these critical life skills on our own, often through painful trial and error. This reflection isn't about casting blame, but about recognizing a missing piece in our own development, and perhaps considering how we might intentionally cultivate that skill set now, making up for lost time and providing a better model for future generations. How often do you turn to philosophy when you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed? For most of us today, philosophy is something we might encounter in a college course or a dense book, an abstract subject far removed from the daily grind. But in the ancient world, particularly for those practicing Stoicism, philosophy was the opposite of abstract. It was an emergency toolkit, a daily operating system, and a practical guide for navigating the inevitable uncertainties of life. It wasn't reserved for scholars in robes. It was used by merchants on risky trade voyages, soldiers preparing for battle, and politicians facing public scorn. Their philosophy was lived, not just debated. They built this practical approach into their days through specific, repeatable exercises. One of the most powerful was the morning meditation or Premeditatio Malorum, which translates to the premeditation of evils. This wasn't about pessimism, it was a psychological vaccine. Before the day began, a practicing Stoic would sit quietly and mentally rehearse the potential challenges ahead. A merchant might visualize his ship sinking, losing his entire cargo. A politician might imagine being publicly ridiculed or losing an election. By willingly visiting these scenarios in their mind first, they stripped future events of their element of surprise and emotional shock. When a difficulty actually arose, it wasn't a catastrophic surprise. It was something they had already faced and overcome in their mind, allowing them to respond with clarity rather than panic. Then, as the day ended, they would engage in another disciplined practice, evening reflection. This was a time for honest, unfiltered self-assessment. They wouldn't just replay the day's events, they would put their own actions and reactions on trial, did I become angry over something outside my control? Did I act with virtue when challenged? Was my response proportionate to the event? This nightly audit wasn't meant to foster guilt, but to provide measurable data on their progress. It was a way to identify patterns, celebrate small victories in self-mastery, and pinpoint where more training was needed. This turns emotional stability from a vague feeling into something tangible you can track and improve night after night. We are incredibly fortunate that one of the most powerful examples of this daily practice survives today in the personal writings of the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. His work, known as Meditations, was never intended for publication. It was his private journal, written mostly while he was on military campaigns, facing immense pressure, betrayal, and the constant threat of war. The book is essentially his own evening reflections, a series of notes and reminders he wrote to himself to reinforce his Stoic principles. He wasn't writing as an emperor to an audience. He was a man having a conversation with his own soul, wrestling with his flaws and urging himself to be better. In one entry, he instructs himself, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." This wasn't cynicism. It was his morning meditation, preparing his mind so that when he inevitably encountered such behavior, he could meet it with understanding rather than outrage, maintaining his own emotional equilibrium for the sake of the empire. This practical application extended to every corner of ancient society. A soldier marching into a terrifying battle would not rely on blind courage alone. He would have been trained to focus only on what was within his control, his formation, his skill with his weapon, his duty to the man next to him. He would accept that the outcome of the battle itself was not his to command. A merchant risking his fortune on a shipment across the Mediterranean would use Stoic principles to manage his anxiety. He could control preparing his goods and hiring a good crew, but he could not control the weather or pirates. By internalizing this dichotomy, he could engage in the venture without being consumed by fear of loss. This made them more resilient, more effective, and far less likely to be paralyzed by circumstances they could not change. So what would it look like to bring a sliver of this ancient daily practice into our modern lives? You don't need to be a Roman emperor or a philosopher to start. It begins with carving out a few quiet minutes at the start or end of your day. In the morning, instead of immediately reaching for your phone, you might take just 2 minutes to sit and mentally prepare for the day's potential challenges. Visualize a difficult conversation going well, or rehearse staying calm in traffic. Then in the evening, perhaps while brushing your teeth or just before bed, ask yourself a few simple questions. Where did I let an external event control my internal state today? What was one moment where I responded with more patience or wisdom than I might have in the past? This isn't about adding another item to your to-do list. It's about changing the quality of your awareness, turning your daily life into your own personal training ground for emotional stability. Cognitive detachment is the Stoic art of creating mental space between stimulus and response. It's that crucial moment of pause where you can observe an emotional impulse, anger, fear, envy, without immediately being carried away by its current. This isn't about becoming cold, distant, or unfeeling. It's about developing the skill to witness your own internal reactions with clarity, so you can choose your response rather than having your response choose for you. The Stoics saw this as a definitive mark of maturity and wisdom, a skill that could be measured by one's consistency in avoiding rash decisions and maintaining inner peace amidst external chaos. This practice was honed through deliberate self-awareness drills. One common exercise was to mentally label emotions as they arose. A Stoic practitioner feeling a surge of jealousy might silently note, This is an impression of jealousy appearing, thereby objectifying the feeling and creating that essential distance. Another drill was to consciously delay any reaction. If insulted, the goal wasn't to swallow the insult, but to intentionally wait for an hour, a day, or even longer before formulating a reply. This enforced pause allowed the initial heat of the emotion to cool, making space for reason to reassert itself. The measurable outcome was simple: fewer regrets, more deliberate actions, and a gradual increase in one's emotional equilibrium, which could be observed by both the individual and their community. The Stoic teacher Epictetus, who lived a life filled with hardship and limitation, gave us perhaps the most straightforward instruction on this skill. He said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." His point was that an external event by itself holds no inherent power to disturb us. The disturbance comes from the judgment we attach to that event, the story we tell ourselves about what it means. Cognitive detachment is the process of isolating the raw event from our layered interpretation of it. By refusing to immediately fuse with our initial judgment, we reclaim our power. We move from being a passive victim of circumstance to an active author of our response. History provides us with powerful examples of this principle in action, and few are more striking than the Roman senator Cato the Younger. He was a man who lived his Stoic principles so fiercely that he became a legend in his own time. During a political trial, an opponent physically attacked him in the middle of the forum, the bustling heart of Roman public life. The assault was sudden, violent, and deeply humiliating. Yet after being struck, Cato did not retaliate in anger. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply stood up, calmly straightened his toga, and continued his argument as if nothing had happened. His composure wasn't a display of weakness, it was a stunning demonstration of strength. By detaching from the natural impulse for retaliation, he revealed that his opponent's action had failed to truly touch him. His inner stability was unassailable, and in that moment, his measured response communicated more power and authority than any outburst ever could. This ancient skill is not about ignoring your feelings, it's about engaging with them more intelligently. It's the difference between being submerged in a wave and standing on the shore observing it. You acknowledge the wave's power and presence, but you are not drowning in it. You maintain your footing. In our modern world, where stimuli and demands on our attention are constant and often designed to trigger emotional reactions, this skill is more valuable than ever. It's the mental tool that allows you to read a frustrating email without firing off a reply you'll regret, to sit in traffic without succumbing to road rage, or to receive criticism without collapsing into self-doubt or defensiveness. So let's make this practical. Bring to mind one recurring situation in your own life where emotions tend to take the driver's seat. It might be a specific type of work deadline that sparks anxiety, a particular comment from a family member that triggers defensiveness, or even the stress of navigating a crowded store. Now imagine applying the principle of cognitive detachment the next time it arises. Instead of immediately reacting, what if you consciously created just 5 seconds of space? In that space, you could take a breath and silently acknowledge the emotion. This is frustration, or this is anxiety, without judging it as good or bad. From that slightly detached vantage point, what new response might become possible? How might that small pause change the entire outcome of the interaction for both you and the people around you? Resilience wasn't optional in ancient times, it was essential for survival. In a world without modern medicine, social safety nets, or global supply chains, people faced adversities that were immediate and often life-threatening. Plagues could decimate cities, droughts could trigger famine, and political instability could erase fortunes overnight. In this context, resilience wasn't a soft skill discussed in wellness seminars. It was a hard, practical necessity that determined whether you and your community would endure. The Stoics didn't just accept this reality, they reframed it entirely. They proposed that hardship was not something to be avoided or cursed, but something to be actively engaged with as the primary training ground for building an unbreakable character. Adversity was the forge, and resilience was the tempered steel that emerged from it. This perspective is woven throughout the writings of Seneca, who faced his own immense share of personal and political turmoil. Exiled to the harsh island of Corsica by Emperor Claudius, stripped of his wealth and status, and later forced to navigate the dangerous court of Nero, Seneca had every reason to succumb to despair. Instead, he wrote extensively about the value of difficulties. In one of his letters, he makes a powerful comparison. He says, "Fire tests gold, adversity tests strong men." His point is that comfort and ease reveal very little about a person's true strength. It is only when we are subjected to the pressures of misfortune that our inner mettle is truly revealed and, more importantly, strengthened. He argued that a smooth and peaceful life might be pleasant, but it leaves us spiritually flabby and unprepared for the inevitable shocks of fate. A challenge, therefore, is not a punishment but an invitation, an opportunity to practice virtues like courage, patience, and perseverance that would otherwise lie dormant. We can see this philosophy in action across ancient history, where resilience often spelled the difference between triumph and catastrophe. Consider the Roman Republic during the Second Punic War, when the brilliant Carthaginian general Hannibal crossed the Alps and brought the war to Italy's doorstep. After annihilating Roman legions at the Battle of Cannae, one of the worst military defeats in history, Rome was brought to the brink of collapse. Tens of thousands were dead, allies were defecting, and panic gripped the city. A less resilient society would have negotiated a surrender, but the Roman Senate, drawing on a deep cultural well of Stoic-influenced discipline, refused to even discuss terms. They regrouped, adopted a new strategy of attrition, and continued to fund and field new armies year after year. Their resilience wasn't an emotional state, it was a series of deliberate, difficult actions taken in the face of overwhelming odds. They viewed the crisis not as an end, but as a test of their national character, and their eventual victory was a direct result of their collective fortitude. This principle applied on an individual level as well. A merchant in the Athenian port of Piraeus might see his entire shipment, his family's wealth, sink in a storm. The Stoic response, cultivated through practice, was not to wallow in grief or rage against the gods. Instead, he was trained to see this event as an external, indifferent occurrence. His task was to focus on what remained within his control, his ability to assess the situation calmly, to learn from any mistakes in planning, to begin the laborious process of rebuilding, and most importantly, to choose his attitude toward the loss. Would he be defined by it, or would he use it as fuel for a comeback? His resilience was measured by the speed and clarity with which he moved from passive suffering to purposeful action. This ancient approach provides a powerful lens through which to view our own modern challenges. While our adversities are often different in nature, more psychological and social than physical, the mechanism for building resilience remains the same. It still requires us to consciously reframe our relationship with difficulty. So think about a current challenge you are facing. It might be a professional setback, a health concern, or a personal conflict. Now, instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" try asking the Stoic question, "What is this situation trying to teach me? How can this difficulty serve as my training ground?" This simple shift in perspective doesn't make the problem disappear, but it transforms you from a passive victim of circumstance into an active participant in your own growth. The obstacle is no longer a barrier on your path, It becomes the path itself, the very thing that will forge a stronger, more capable version of you. When was the last time you felt fully present, not distracted by a screen, not replaying a past conversation, not anxiously planning the next hour, but completely immersed in the current moment? For many of us, that state feels rare and fleeting, something that happens by accident rather than by design. The ancient Stoics, however, viewed this kind of mindful presence not as a happy accident, but as a critical discipline for emotional stability. They understood that anxiety is almost always a product of living in the hypothetical future, while regret and resentment anchor us in an unchangeable past. The only place where we can actually exercise control, and therefore find genuine peace, is in the immediate and unfolding present. Their practice of mindfulness was a deliberate effort to corral a wandering mind back to the only time and place where life is truly happening, right here, right now. This focus on the immediate task is a recurring theme in the personal writings of Marcus Aurelius. In his meditations, he consistently pulls his own attention away from grand, overwhelming concerns and back to the small, manageable duty directly in front of him. He advises himself, give yourself a gift, the present moment. In another passage he writes, don't let your imagination be crushed by life as a whole, stick with the situation at hand. This wasn't a call to ignore larger responsibilities, but a strategic method for managing them. By narrowing his focus to the single next step, he could avoid the paralysis that comes from contemplating the immense, terrifying whole of a problem. A general doesn't win a war by obsessing over the entire battlefield at once. He wins by focusing on the specific movement of his next cohort. Marcus was applying the same principle to the battlefield of his own mind. This Stoic form of mindfulness was put into practice by people in all walks of ancient life. Consider a stonemason meticulously carving an intricate design on a public building. His success and his safety depended entirely on his focus being locked onto the precise movement of his chisel. A single moment of distraction, a thought about a debt he owed or an argument he'd had could ruin the artwork or cause a serious injury. His mindfulness was a non-negotiable requirement of his craft. Similarly, a philosopher preparing a lecture would need to concentrate deeply on constructing a logical argument, word by word, without being pulled away by worries about how his students might receive it. Their ability to remain present was what allowed them to produce work of the highest quality. It was a practical skill that yielded tangible results, reinforcing its value every single day. The Stoic approach differs from some modern interpretations of mindfulness in its intensely active and purposeful nature. It wasn't primarily about achieving a state of blank relaxation. It was about applying full attention to a chosen action. They called this performing your duty with full presence of mind. Whether the task was leading a Senate meeting, teaching a child, or simply walking from one place to another, the goal was to do it with your whole being, intentionally and without mental distraction. This practice served as a constant anchor, pulling them back from the turbulent seas of worry about tomorrow or regret about yesterday, and grounding them firmly on the solid shore of the present, where their power actually resided. You can introduce this ancient practice into your own life with a remarkably simple exercise, one that requires no special equipment or training. Sometime today, set aside just 60 seconds. Find a quiet spot if you can, but even a busy environment will work. For that single minute, choose one ordinary activity and commit to giving it your complete and undivided attention. If you choose to drink a glass of water, focus entirely on the sensation of the cool glass in your hand, the sound of the liquid, the feeling of it quenching your thirst. If you're walking, pay close attention to the rhythm of your breath and the sensation of your feet making contact with the ground. When your mind inevitably wanders, as minds are wired to do, gently and without judgment, guide it back to that singular focus. This 1-minute drill is a microdose of ancient Stoic training, a small but powerful way to reclaim your attention from the past and future and exercise your ability to be fully, calmly, and effectively present. Roman emperors were judged not just by their military conquests or architectural projects, but by their equanimity during moments of profound turmoil. In a society where the ruler's whims could mean life or death for thousands, the ability to maintain emotional stability was seen as a non-negotiable pillar of effective leadership. A leader who was volatile, prone to fits of rage, or paralyzed by fear was a danger to the state itself. Their emotional state directly influenced the stability of the empire, public morale, and the efficiency of the entire government. This is why the Stoic ideal of apatheia, not apathy, but freedom from destructive passions, was considered an essential quality for anyone in a position of power. It was the difference between ruling with reason and being ruled by emotion. This principle is captured with deep irony in the relationship between the Stoic philosopher Seneca and his most infamous student, the Emperor Nero. Seneca, in his essay on anger, wrote extensively about the need for a ruler to master their emotions, arguing that no plague has cost the human race more dear than anger. He advised that a leader must be like a doctor, calm, objective, and focused on the cure even when faced with a gruesome wound. He presented these lessons to Nero, painting a picture of a sovereign who could weather insults, setbacks, and threats with a steady hand, thereby earning the genuine respect and loyalty of his people. The tragic historical reality, of course, is that Nero became a textbook example of the un-Stoic leader, his reign descending into paranoia, artistic narcissism, and horrific cruelty. Seneca's advice stands not as a success story, but as a powerful testament to the ancient understanding of what leadership should be and the catastrophic consequences for everyone when it is not. We find a far more successful embodiment of these principles in Rome's first emperor, Augustus. Unlike his great-uncle Julius Caesar, whose ambition and flair often tipped into arrogance, Augustus cultivated a public image of unwavering calm, duty, and self-control. After avenging Caesar's murder in a bloody civil war, he could have easily ruled as a tyrant. Instead, he carefully constructed a republic in disguise, presenting himself as merely the first among equals. He famously avoided the outward trappings of monarchy, living in a relatively modest house and subjecting himself to the laws of the state. When faced with personal tragedies, including the deaths of his preferred heirs, he was noted for his public composure. This emotional stability wasn't a sign of coldness. It was a calculated political tool that provided a much-needed sense of order, predictability, and safety after a century of internal conflict. He inspired confidence because he appeared to be in control of himself and therefore capable of controlling the empire. This ancient standard for leadership offers a revealing lens through which to view our modern counterparts. We can instinctively feel the difference between a leader who responds to a crisis with panic and one who addresses it with measured resolve. Consider a national leader navigating a natural disaster. The one who appears on screen visibly shaken, spreading fear and uncertainty, often exacerbates the crisis. In contrast, the leader who communicates clear facts, acknowledges the gravity of the situation without being overwhelmed by it, and outlines a concrete plan of action, inspires calm and fosters collective resilience. Their emotional state is contagious, and their stability becomes a public resource. This isn't about being emotionless. It's about demonstrating that emotions are being managed in service to the greater good. So we have to ask ourselves, what qualities do we truly value in a leader's emotional demeanor today? Is it the passionate firebrand who mirrors our own outrage, or the steady hand that can guide us through it? Do we prize the leader who is always excited and optimistic, or the one who remains sober and clear-eyed even when the news is bad? The Stoics would argue that the most valuable leader is not the one who feels the most, but the one who manages their feelings the best, the one who can separate their personal frustrations and fears from their public duty, making decisions based on rational consideration for the long-term welfare of the community, rather than on short-term emotional reactions. This ancient measure of leadership is perhaps more relevant than ever in our complex and interconnected world. Today, we often hear messages encouraging us to express our emotions freely, to let our feelings out as a sign of authenticity and health. But if we could step back into the ancient Greco-Roman world, we would find a social landscape that prized a very different virtue: emotional restraint. In these societies, your public comportment wasn't just a personal matter. It was a direct reflection of your character, your upbringing, and your fitness for a role within the community. Maintaining a calm and steady demeanor, especially under social pressure, was a visible marker of your internal discipline and virtue. It was a sign that you were a reliable citizen, a trustworthy leader, and a person of good judgment. This cultural expectation provided a powerful external reinforcement for the internal work of Stoic practice, creating a feedback loop where societal norms and personal philosophy worked in tandem to build emotional stability. This idea of performing your social role with appropriate composure is perfectly captured by the Stoic teacher Epictetus. He offered very practical advice on how to navigate gatherings and interactions without losing your center. He advised, if you're going to a party with others, remember to behave appropriately there as well. Then, should some incident occur, you will not be swept away by the intensity of your reaction and lose your composure. His point was that social settings are a kind of testing ground. They are filled with potential triggers: off-hand comments, subtle slights, disagreements, or even excessive praise, all of which could provoke an unguarded emotional response. The goal wasn't to become a silent, unfeeling statue, but to engage with others while consciously managing your reactions, ensuring that your behavior remained measured and virtuous regardless of the provocation. We can see this standard applied with utmost seriousness in the most formal of ancient social settings, the courtroom. In both Athens and Rome, a man's reputation and fortune could hinge on his ability to present a case, whether as an orator or a defendant, with unwavering rationality and calm. The famed Roman orator Cicero, though not a strict Stoic, embodied this ideal in his techniques. He taught that effective persuasion came not from dramatic, emotional outbursts, but from a structured, logical argument delivered with authoritative presence. A speaker who became flustered by interruptions, who responded to an opponent's jab with visible anger, or who betrayed anxiety through a trembling voice would immediately lose the respect of the judges and the crowd. His emotional stability was a critical component of his credibility. It signaled that his mind was clear, his arguments were sound, and he was in control of the situation. This expectation extended far beyond the elite. Imagine a common merchant in the bustling agora or forum negotiating a deal. If he became visibly angry or frustrated during a tough negotiation, he would be seen as weak and unpredictable, potentially costing him the sale and damaging his business relationships. A craftsman who reacted with panic to a difficult client's request would be viewed as unskilled and unreliable. In a society where business was conducted face-to-face and your word was your bond, your external emotional presentation was a currency as real as silver and gold. It was a practical, measurable asset that directly influenced your social and economic standing. This creates a fascinating point of contrast with our modern world. While ancient societies provided clear, external scripts for emotional expression that reinforced stability, our contemporary culture often sends mixed messages. We are encouraged to be authentic and vulnerable, which can be incredibly healthy, but we also receive constant stimulation from media and social platforms that are expertly designed to trigger immediate, often intense emotional reactions: outrage, fear, envy, and anxiety. The social rewards online can sometimes go to the loudest, most reactive voice, not the most measured one. This leaves us without the consistent cultural container that ancient citizens had, making the internal discipline of Stoicism not just a philosophical choice, but a necessary form of self-defense for our mental clarity. So it's worth taking a moment to reflect on the social expectations you navigate every day. How do the people around you, your family, your friends, your colleagues, expect you to express emotions? Are you rewarded for being consistently calm and rational, or is there sometimes pressure to perform excitement, outrage, or worry to fit in? How does the constant stream of information from your devices shape what you feel is an appropriate reaction to world events? Becoming aware of these invisible social forces is the first step toward consciously choosing your response, rather than simply reacting on autopilot. It allows you to decide which modern norms serve your tranquility and which ones you might need to gently resist to cultivate the ancient, and perhaps more enduring, virtue of emotional stability. The dichotomy of control is the Stoic tool for emotional clarity. It is a simple yet profoundly powerful mental framework designed to sort the entire world into two distinct categories, instantly cutting through confusion and freeing up immense amounts of mental energy that we often waste on fruitless worry. This concept is the very bedrock of Stoic practice, because without understanding what is truly ours to command, we are destined to live in a state of constant frustration, forever trying to bend the unbendable world to our will. When we successfully apply this filter to our experiences, we achieve a remarkable kind of stability, because our emotional well-being is no longer held hostage by the countless events and people that are fundamentally beyond our influence. This foundational principle is laid out in the most direct terms possible at the very beginning of the Enchiridion, the handbook by the Stoic teacher Epictetus. He starts with this unambiguous declaration: some things are within our power, while others are not within our power. Within our power are our own faculties of judgment, our impulse to act, our desires, our aversions, in short, everything that is essentially the output of our own mind. Everything else, our body, our property, our reputation, our job, what other people say or do, is not within our power. Epictetus argues that peace of mind is only possible when we invest our attention and effort exclusively in the first category, and learn to accept the second category with grace, as the indifferent playing field upon which we exercise our virtue. The turmoil in our lives, he suggests, springs directly from the fundamental error of claiming ownership over things that were never ours to begin with. We can see the immense practical value of this dichotomy in the most ordinary of modern scenarios. Imagine you're driving to an incredibly important job interview, and you suddenly find yourself stuck in a massive, unmoving traffic jam. Your first instinctual reaction is likely a surge of panic, frustration, and anger. You might pound the steering wheel, curse the other drivers, and feel your heart rate skyrocket as you watch the clock tick past your appointment time. This is the natural, untrained response. Now, apply the dichotomy of control. What is truly within your power in this moment? You cannot control the traffic. You cannot control the fact that the car ahead of you got into an accident. You cannot control that the interview started without you. What you can control is your judgment about this event. You can decide that this is not a personal catastrophe, but merely an external circumstance. You can control your next action, perhaps calling the interviewer to calmly explain the situation and ask to reschedule. You can control your breathing to calm your body. By shifting your focus entirely to that small circle of control, you transform a panic-inducing crisis into a manageable situation, preserving your composure and actually improving your chances of a positive outcome. This same framework applies to the complexities of workplace dynamics. Consider a conflict with a difficult colleague who constantly criticizes your ideas in meetings. The untrained mind will fixate on the other person's behavior, ruminating on their unfairness, plotting ways to retaliate, or sinking into anxiety about future interactions. This is a recipe for misery because it places your emotional state entirely at the mercy of someone else's actions. The Stoic approach begins by applying the dichotomy. You cannot control your colleagues' opinions, their tone, or their choices. What you can control is your preparation for the meeting, the quality of your own work, your decision to respond to criticism with rationality rather than emotion, and even your choice to view this person as a training partner who is inadvertently helping you strengthen your own resolve and communication skills. This shift doesn't guarantee the other person will change, but it guarantees that you will no longer be tormented by their actions. To make this ancient tool your own, try a simple but powerful exercise. Bring to mind a current source of stress in your life. It could be a looming deadline, a strained relationship, or a concern about your health. Now, take a literal piece of paper or a digital note and draw a line down the center. On one side, list everything about this situation that is not within your control. Be ruthlessly honest. This might include other people's feelings, past events, market conditions, or the weather. On the other side, list everything that is within your control. This will always be a shorter list, but it is the list that contains your true power, your effort, your attitude, your preparation, your boundaries, your next step. The simple act of externalizing this and seeing it visually can be liberating. It immediately halts the exhausting mental effort of trying to manage the unmanageable and redirects your energy toward the things you can actually change, providing immediate emotional clarity and a clear path forward. Imagine mentally rehearsing worst-case scenarios not to feed your fears, but to systematically drain them of their power. This is the essence of the ancient Stoic practice known as Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of evils. Far from being a pessimistic exercise in dwelling on the negative, it was a proactive psychological drill designed to build emotional calluses and inoculate the mind against the shock of misfortune. By voluntarily visiting potential adversities in the safety of their own imagination, Stoics could face the uncertainties of real life with a remarkable degree of composure, because nothing the world threw at them was entirely unexpected or unfamiliar. The Roman philosopher Seneca was a powerful advocate for this technique, framing it as a tool for building resilience rather than inviting despair. In his letters, he offers a brilliantly practical analogy. He writes, "What is quite unlooked for is more crushing in its effect, and unexpectedness adds to the weight of a disaster. The fact that it was unforeseen has never failed to intensify a person's grief." This is a reason for ensuring that nothing ever takes us by surprise. He advises us to anticipate not only that we might lose our possessions or status, but that we will certainly lose them, and even that our friends might prove disloyal or our plans might fail. This isn't about expecting the worst to always happen. It's about removing the element of surprise, which is often the sharpest sting of any misfortune. By mentally digesting these possibilities beforehand, we ensure that if they do occur, we meet them with recognition rather than shock, and with a pre-prepared plan of action rooted in our values. This practice was a standard part of the emotional toolkit for anyone facing objectively high-risk situations in the ancient world. A Roman legionary on the eve of a major battle wouldn't just blindly hope for victory. A disciplined soldier would sit by his campfire and mentally walk through the chaos of the next day. He would visualize the deafening noise, the confusion of the ranks breaking, the possibility of being wounded, or even the reality of dying. By doing this, he wasn't giving up, he was performing a vital mental rehearsal. When the battle actually began, the sensory overload was less likely to paralyze him with terror because he had already faced these horrors in his mind. His fear was acknowledged and processed beforehand, leaving his mind clearer to focus on his training, his formation, and his duty to the soldier beside him. Similarly, a merchant's son about to embark on his first sea voyage would be advised to contemplate the very real dangers of storms, pirates, and shipwrecks. By accepting these risks as part of the venture itself, he could then make rational preparations insuring his goods, choosing a reliable captain, and embark with a calm acceptance of the journey's nature, rather than a naive optimism that could be shattered by the first storm cloud on the horizon. The underlying psychology is remarkably aligned with modern therapeutic techniques like exposure therapy, where individuals are gradually and safely exposed to the source of their anxiety to reduce its power. Premeditatio Malorum is a form of cognitive exposure. By repeatedly visualizing a feared event in vivid detail, you become desensitized to the initial wave of panic it provokes. The scenario loses its novelty and its ability to hijack your rational mind. This creates a crucial space between the event and your reaction, allowing you to access a pre-considered, virtuous response instead of a primal, fearful one. You are not practicing being afraid, you are practicing being calm in the face of what you fear. To integrate this ancient form of mental training into your own life, you can start with a simple exercise. Identify one upcoming event that is causing you a low level of background anxiety. It might be a difficult conversation you need to have, a presentation at work, or even a medical appointment. Find a few minutes of quiet time and close your eyes. Now, vividly imagine the worst-case outcome of that event unfolding in detail. Don't just skim the surface, really play the movie. See the other person reacting with anger. Feel the heat in your face as you stumble over your words during the presentation. Hear the doctor delivering unsettling news. Sit with the uncomfortable feelings that arise. Then, and this is the most critical step, visualize yourself navigating that worst-case scenario with stoic composure. See yourself breathing deeply, listening calmly to the angry person, and responding with dignity instead of defensiveness. Watch yourself acknowledging the presentation stumble, collecting yourself, and continuing. Picture yourself accepting the doctor's news with courage, and then asking clear, rational questions about the next steps. You are not just rehearsing the adversity, you are rehearsing your resilient response to it. This practice doesn't prevent the event from happening, but it fundamentally changes your relationship to the possibility, replacing vague dread with a specific, managed plan and the confident knowledge that you have already faced it in your mind and remained steady. Stoicism wasn't solitary, it thrived in communities and teacher-student bonds. While we often picture the lone philosopher meditating in stillness, the actual practice of building emotional stability was profoundly social in the ancient world. It was within the walls of philosophical schools, in bustling public stoas, and through intimate mentorship that abstract ideas were forged into lived reality. These spaces provided something crucial that solitary reading could not: external perspective, gentle correction, and the powerful accountability that comes from being known by others who share your goals. Your progress in mastering your emotions wasn't a private metric. It was something observed, encouraged, and challenged by a guide and a peer group who could see your blind spots far more clearly than you ever could alone. This emphasis on guided practice over theoretical knowledge was a hallmark of teachers like Musonius Rufus, one of the most influential Stoic mentors in first-century Rome. He famously taught that philosophy was worthless if it only resided in clever arguments and fine words. He insisted, virtue is not only theoretical knowledge, it is also practical. For Musonius, this meant his students didn't just listen to lectures, they engaged in lived exercises. They practiced enduring hardship, managing simple diets, and engaging in dialogue designed to test their judgments under pressure. His teaching was a form of emotional and ethical coaching, where the goal was not to win a debate but to transform one's character through consistent, critiqued action. The mentor's role was to provide the map and the compass, but the student had to walk the path themselves, with the teacher observing their gait and helping them correct their stride. These philosophical circles functioned as the ancient equivalent of modern support groups or mastermind groups, creating a unique safe space for men and women to openly discuss their emotional struggles without judgment. In a culture that publicly prized composure, these communities offered a private container for vulnerability. A young Roman senator could confess his fear of public speaking to his peers. A merchant could share his anxiety about a financial loss. Within the trust of the school, they could dissect these emotional reactions rationally, applying the dichotomy of control and other Stoic tools to their personal experiences with the guidance of a more seasoned practitioner. This process normalized the challenge of emotional self-mastery, reinforcing that everyone struggled with the same human impulses. It transformed the journey from a lonely, uphill battle into a shared expedition, making the daunting work of internal change feel possible through collective effort and mutual understanding. The profound benefit of this communal approach is that it provided a constant feedback loop for emotional growth. It's one thing to read in a book that you shouldn't get angry over trivial things. It's another to have a trusted mentor gently point out the moment your voice tightens with irritation over a spilled cup of wine during a discussion. That immediate, gentle correction is invaluable. It makes the abstract principle concrete and personal. Fellow students could also offer observations, noting when someone's stated philosophy contradicted their actions, a practice that encouraged humility and self-awareness. This network of support ensured that Stoicism was not just an intellectual hobby but a daily discipline, with the community acting as both a mirror reflecting your current state and a scaffold supporting your growth toward a more stable self. This ancient model invites us to reconsider our own, often isolated, approaches to self-improvement. How many of us try to manage stress, anxiety, or anger entirely on our own, reading books or watching videos in private but lacking a trusted circle to help us apply the lessons? The Stoics would argue that this is like trying to learn a complex craft without ever seeking an apprentice or a community of craftsmen. We might see slight improvement, but we'll miss the nuanced guidance that accelerates real, lasting change. The journey toward emotional stability is fraught with internal obstacles we can't always see for ourselves, and a supportive community provides the external eyes and encouraging voices we need to navigate them successfully. So consider your own life for a moment. Who are the people in your world that encourage your better nature? Do you have a relationship where you can discuss your emotional reactions honestly, without fear of being dismissed or criticized? This doesn't require finding a formal Stoic school. It can be as simple as identifying one thoughtful friend, a family member, or even a professional coach or therapist who is willing to engage in these deeper conversations. You could propose starting a small reading group focused on practical philosophy, where the explicit goal is not just to discuss ideas, but to hold each other accountable for applying them in your daily lives. The goal is to move from solitary practice to shared growth, creating your own modern version of that ancient, supportive community that recognized we become our best selves not alone but together. Your emotional state was not just personal, it affected the entire polis. In the tightly woven social fabric of ancient city-states, the inner turmoil of a single individual could ripple outward, influencing the mood of a household, the decisions of a marketplace, and even the stability of the government itself. Emotional stability was therefore not considered a private luxury or a self-help goal. It was a fundamental civic duty. A citizen's ability to manage their fears, anger, and desires was viewed as a direct contribution to public order and collective resilience. When each person took responsibility for their own internal state, the entire community became stronger, more rational, and better equipped to face external threats, internal strife, or natural disasters. This perspective created a powerful social contract where personal development was intrinsically linked to the common good. This idea that self-mastery is the very foundation of our duty to others is articulated with great clarity by the emperor-philosopher Marcus Aurelius. In his meditations, he constantly reminds himself that his own peace of mind is a prerequisite for effective leadership. He writes, "You've been given the capacity to endure everything that happens to you, to treat external events with dignity, and to act with justice, which means seeing that every event is based on rational principles and serves a rational purpose." For Marcus, his personal equanimity wasn't just for his own benefit, it was a resource for the empire. By enduring his own burdens with dignity, he could act justly towards millions. His emotional stability allowed him to make clear-headed decisions in times of plague and war, ensuring that his personal reactions did not amplify a crisis for his subjects. He saw his inner fortress as the first line of defense for Rome itself. We can see the practical, life-saving value of this principle in how ancient societies navigated moments of mass panic. Imagine a rumor spreading like wildfire through the crowded streets of Rome, a report of an impending invasion, a sudden shortage of grain, or the outbreak of a deadly illness. In the absence of instant communication, fear could transform a crowd into a mob in minutes, leading to riots, stampedes, and needless destruction. The critical factor in preventing this cascade was often the visible composure of a single authority figure. A magistrate, a respected elder, or even a centurion who remained visibly calm could serve as a human anchor, steadying the collective nerves. His emotional state was contagious. By not participating in the panic, by speaking in measured tones and issuing rational directives, he gave permission for others to also regain their composure. His personal stability became a public utility, literally preventing bloodshed and preserving social order. This concept extended far beyond formal leadership roles. Every citizen in their own sphere of influence was expected to be a pillar of calm. A father who managed his anxiety during a drought would prevent that fear from infecting his entire family, allowing them to focus on practical solutions like rationing and finding alternative water sources. A ship's captain who remained steady during a storm inspired the same steadiness in his crew, enabling them to follow orders precisely and vastly improving their chances of survival. A merchant who refused to give in to greed or fear during an economic downturn could help stabilize prices and maintain trust within the marketplace. In each case, the individual's emotional regulation acted as a buffer against collective hysteria, proving that civic virtue was as much about managing one's internal world as it was about participating in public life. This ancient understanding stands in stark contrast to much of our modern, hyper-individualistic culture, where emotions are often treated as purely personal property with no social consequence. We are encouraged to express ourselves without always considering the impact our emotional expressions have on our families, our co-workers, and our broader communities. We might vent our frustrations openly, not realizing we are inadvertently raising the stress levels of everyone around us. We might succumb to anxiety about a news event, amplifying that fear within our social circles. The Stoic view challenges us to expand our awareness, to see that our inner peace is not a solitary achievement, but a contribution to the collective well-being. Your calm is a public service. Your resilience makes your community more resilient. So let's bring this concept home. Take a moment to consider the various communities you are a part of: your family, your friend group, your workplace, your online networks. How does your emotional state, particularly in times of stress, impact the people within those circles? When you arrive home from a frustrating day at work, does your mood set the tone for the entire household? When your team at work faces a setback, does your reaction amplify the anxiety or help to dissolve it? Your emotional energy is a powerful force that either adds to the collective burden or helps to carry it. Recognizing this is the first step toward transforming your personal practice of emotional stability from a private endeavor into a genuine civic duty, a quiet but profound way to strengthen the world immediately around you. Ancient Stoics kept journals to track their emotional progress, treating this daily practice not as a casual diary entry, but as a rigorous form of self-accountability. This was their method for turning the abstract goal of emotional stability into something tangible and measurable. Each night, they would engage in a structured review of the day's events, but their focus wasn't on what happened to them. It was on their own reactions to those events. They would dissect their behavior with the objective eye of a scientist studying a specimen, asking pointed questions. Where did I let a trivial comment provoke me? Did I act with courage when presented with a difficult choice? Was my anxiety over that meeting proportionate to the actual stakes? This process transformed their internal world from a blur of unconscious impulses into a landscape of clear, observable patterns that could be understood and ultimately mastered. We have a powerful model for this practice in the writings of Seneca, who dedicated time each evening to this exact form of constructive reflection. In his moral letters, he describes this nightly ritual as a time to call yourself to account and to review the entire day. He would ask himself specific, challenging questions. What bad habit have you cured today? What fault have you resisted? In what respect are you better? This was not an exercise in self-flagellation or guilt. It was a data-driven audit of his character. By cataloging his successes and setbacks with brutal honesty, he could identify the specific triggers that most often disrupted his peace of mind. This allowed him to anticipate these triggers in the future and prepare a more virtuous response, turning each day's failures into the raw material for tomorrow's improvement. His journal was his personal training log for the soul. This ancient habit finds a powerful echo in many modern therapeutic practices and popular self-improvement tools, proving the timelessness of the Stoic insight. The contemporary practice of keeping a gratitude journal, for instance, shares a common root. While the focus is on noting positive elements, the underlying mechanism is the same. It forces a pause at the end of the day to deliberately direct one's attention, thereby reshaping one's perspective and emotional baseline. Similarly, the structured exercises used in cognitive behavioral therapy (CBT), where patients are asked to record negative thoughts, identify cognitive distortions, and reframe them, are a direct clinical descendant of the Stoic evening review. Both methods are built on the understanding that we cannot change what we do not first observe and name. You can incorporate this transformative practice into your own life with remarkable simplicity, starting tonight. You don't need a leather-bound journal or a fountain pen. The medium is far less important than the intention. Set aside just 5 minutes before you go to sleep. In that time, ask yourself 2 or 3 of Seneca's questions, adapted for your own life. What was one moment today where I felt a strong negative emotion, and what was the underlying judgment that triggered it? Did I spend more mental energy today on things within my control or outside of it? What is one small action I took that was aligned with my values? The goal is not to produce a lengthy essay, but to create a brief, honest record. Over time, this 5-minute investment will build a compelling map of your emotional landscape, revealing the recurring patterns that either support or sabotage your tranquility, giving you the clarity needed to consciously choose a different path forward. Stoicism doesn't reject emotions, it seeks to align them with reason. This is one of the most common misunderstandings about this ancient philosophy. The Stoics weren't advocating for a life of robotic numbness or cold detachment from the human experience. Instead, they saw our feelings as powerful, natural forces that could either serve us or sabotage us, depending on whether they were guided by the rudder of rational judgment. Emotions, in their view, were like a strong horse full of energy and potential, but directionless and potentially dangerous without a skilled rider to guide them. The goal was never to kill the horse, but to train it, to form a partnership where strength and direction worked in harmony. This nuanced balance is what allowed a Stoic to feel deeply without being drowned by those feelings, to experience joy and grief without being controlled by them. This idea that our passions should be overseen by our rational mind was explored not just by Stoics but by other great thinkers of the era. The Roman orator Cicero, in his work Tusculan Disputations, delves into this very concept. While not a Stoic himself, he engaged deeply with their ideas and described the ideal state as one where reason acts as a master over the emotions, not through force and suppression, but through understanding and gentle command. He argued that the tumultuous passions, blind rage, consuming envy, paralyzing fear arise from errors in our judgment, from mistaking something unimportant for something vital, or something temporary for something permanent. The wise person, therefore, doesn't feel less, they feel more accurately. Their emotional responses are proportionate and appropriate to the true nature of the event, because they have allowed reason to examine and, if necessary, correct their initial instinctual impressions. We can see the stark difference between these two approaches, emotion-led versus reason-guided, in countless everyday decisions. Imagine 2 people receiving the exact same critical feedback on a project at work. The first person, operating purely from emotion, might immediately feel a hot wave of humiliation and defensiveness. Their judgment, clouded by that initial feeling, might lead them to fire off an angry email, make a sarcastic comment to a colleague, or completely dismiss the useful parts of the critique. They are being led by the untrained horse, and the path is likely to be destructive. The second person, trained in Stoic alignment, would feel that same initial sting of embarrassment. That's the natural human reaction. But then reason would quickly intervene. It would create a moment of pause to ask, is this feedback true? What can I learn from it? Is the person giving it trying to help me or hurt me? By subjecting the emotional impulse to this rational cross-examination, their subsequent response becomes measured and constructive. They might ask clarifying questions, thank the person for the input, and then decide which parts to act upon. The emotion was acknowledged, but it did not get to hold the reins. This balancing act extends to positive emotions as well. The Stoics were famously cautious about intense euphoria or giddy excitement, not because they were joyless, but because they understood that a sharp high is often followed by a crushing low when circumstances inevitably change. Their alternative wasn't a flat line of feeling, but a more sustainable and deeply rooted sense of contentment and gratitude. Consider someone who gets a large, unexpected bonus. The emotion-led reaction might be an immediate burst of elation, leading to impulsive spending on luxury items, a reaction based on the thrill of the moment. The reason-guided response would certainly include feeling pleased and grateful, but it would also involve a calm assessment. Does this change my long-term plans? Should I save this, invest it, or use it to pay down debt? How can I use this resource wisely? The joy is still present, but it is enriched and given greater meaning by being channeled through thoughtful consideration. This ancient practice of inner alignment is perhaps more relevant now than ever, in a world expertly engineered to trigger our emotional responses without any filter of reason. Social media platforms, news cycles, and advertising are all designed to provoke immediate reactions: outrage, fear, desire, envy, because those reactions drive engagement and consumption. We are constantly encouraged to feel first and think later, if at all. The Stoic discipline of inserting a moment of rational oversight between the stimulus and our response is a form of mental self-defense in this environment. It's the tool that allows you to see a provocative headline and choose to read the article before forming an opinion, or to see a desirable product and ask if you truly need it before clicking buy now. Take a moment to turn this lens on your own life. Over the next day or two, make it a small personal experiment to simply notice the interplay between your emotions and your reason. Pick a few moments where you feel a strong reaction: frustration in traffic, excitement over good news, irritation with a family member. When that feeling arises, pause just for a second and ask yourself a simple question. Is my reasoning mind in dialogue with this emotion, or has it been completely sidelined? You're not trying to change anything yet, just to observe the current balance of power within your own mind. That act of noticing itself is the first and most crucial step toward becoming the skilled rider of your own emotional life, guiding your feelings with purpose rather than being dragged along by them. How do you know if you're actually becoming more emotionally stable? In our modern world, we often measure progress with external metrics: a promotion at work, a higher number on a scale, the balance in a bank account. But for the ancient Stoics, the measurement of emotional growth was an internal and far more nuanced art. They believed that true progress in stability wasn't about never feeling anger or anxiety, but about how you related to those feelings when they arose. It was measured in the subtle shift from being controlled by an emotion to simply observing it, in the growing space between a triggering event and your chosen response. This wasn't a transformation that happened overnight. It was a gradual strengthening, noticed not in grand, sweeping declarations, but in the accumulation of small, daily victories over one's own automatic reactions. The Stoic teacher Epictetus, who focused intensely on the practical application of philosophy, gave us a beautifully simple gauge for this kind of progress. He suggested that we should not pride ourselves on any philosophical principle we can recite, but rather look to our own impulses and aversions. He said, if you didn't learn these things in order to cure your anger, your grief, your envy, your ambition, then what did you learn them for? For him, the proof was in the emotional pudding. Progress was visible in the moment you received a criticism and felt a flash of defensiveness, but then chose to listen instead of argue. It was evident when a travel delay sparked initial frustration, but you quickly recalibrated and used the time productively. These were the measurable data points of inner development. This measurement relied on three primary tools: rigorous self-observation, honest feedback from a mentor or community, and the direct evidence of navigating specific life challenges. The daily practice of evening reflection, which we discussed earlier, was the cornerstone of self-observation. This was where you became your own scientist, gathering data on your emotional reactions. You would note not just the big outbursts, but the minor irritations, the sigh of impatience in a long line, the internal complaint about the weather, the slight jealousy toward a colleague's success. The goal was to track the frequency and intensity of these reactions over time. Was your first impulse to blame external circumstances less automatic than it was a month ago? Were you able to recover your center more quickly after a disruption? This nightly audit provided a personal benchmark against which you could measure your growth. Furthermore, this was not a journey meant to be taken in isolation. In the philosophical schools and circles of the ancient world, progress was also measured through the insightful eyes of a mentor and peers. A teacher like Musonius Rufus or Seneca would observe their students not just for their intellectual understanding, but for their embodied practice. They might gently point out, "I noticed your voice became sharp when that point was challenged," or "You handled that unexpected interruption today with remarkable patience." This external feedback was invaluable because we often have blind spots to our own emotional habits. Our self-perception can be skewed. We might think we're being assertive when we're actually being aggressive, or calm when we're actually disengaged. A trusted community provides a reflective mirror, offering a more objective measure of where we truly stand on the path to stability. The most definitive measure of all, however, was performance under pressure. Ancient texts and stories are filled with accounts that served as benchmarks for Stoic development. The ultimate test wasn't how you behaved on a quiet, peaceful afternoon, but how you comported yourself when fate delivered a blow. Could you maintain your principles when facing exile, like Seneca? Could you uphold your duty and integrity in the face of public humiliation, like Cato? Could you lead with compassion and reason during a devastating plague, like Marcus Aurelius? While most people would never face trials of that magnitude, the principle scaled down to everyday life. Your progress could be measured in a smaller crisis. Did you respond to a sudden financial setback with panic and blame, or with a calm assessment of your options? When a family member spoke to you in anger, did you mirror that anger back, or could you de-escalate the situation? Overcoming these specific challenges provided the most convincing evidence that your practice was working, that the philosophy had moved from your head into your bones. This ancient approach to measurement invites us to move beyond vague intentions and into the realm of tangible practice. Instead of a generic wish to be less stressed, the Stoic method encourages us to set a small, specific, and measurable goal for our emotional improvement. So this week, choose one single, recurring trigger that usually pulls you off center. It might be your morning commute, a particular colleague's habit, or the nightly chaos of getting dinner on the table. Now set a concrete goal around it. For instance, this week, when I feel that first jolt of road rage, I will take one deep breath and remind myself that the other driver's behavior is outside my control before I react. Or, when my child has a meltdown, I will consciously lower my voice instead of raising it. The goal isn't perfection, it's mindful practice. At the end of each day, simply note whether you succeeded in your small mission. That note, whether a checkmark or a reflection, is your data. It is the ancient, enduring way to measure the quiet, powerful progress of building an unshakable core. Many modern therapies echo Stoic principles from millennia ago, revealing a fascinating continuity in our understanding of how to build a healthy mind. While the language has shifted from philosophy to psychology, the core mechanisms for achieving emotional stability remain remarkably consistent. This isn't a coincidence. The founders of several major therapeutic schools explicitly drew inspiration from Stoic thought. recognizing that these ancient exercises offered a practical and effective toolkit for alleviating human suffering. The most direct and well-documented link is between Stoicism and cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, which is one of the most widely practiced and evidence-based forms of therapy today. The central premise of CBT is that our emotions and behaviors are not directly caused by external events, but by our beliefs and interpretations of those events. This is a near-perfect parallel to the Stoic teaching that it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about those things. Both frameworks empower the individual by shifting the focus from changing the unchangeable world to changing one's own perspective and response. The therapeutic technique at the heart of CBT is called cognitive restructuring, which is the process of identifying, challenging, and altering distorted thought patterns. A therapist helping a client with social anxiety, for instance, would work with them to uncover the automatic negative thought that everyone at this party will think I'm boring. This is a cognitive distortion, an unexamined judgment, just as the Stoics would have called it. The therapy then involves gathering evidence for and against this belief, and ultimately developing a more balanced and realistic thought, such as, some people might enjoy my conversation, and others might not, and that's okay. This is the modern, clinical application of the Stoic practice of examining impressions. Epictetus advised his students to say to every troubling impression, "You are just an impression, and not at all the thing you claim to represent." A cognitive behavioral therapist is, in essence, teaching their client to do the very same thing, providing them with the tools to be their own philosopher guide. We can see this bridge between ancient and modern most clearly in the work of Dr. Albert Ellis, one of the founding figures of CBT. He openly credited the Stoics as a primary influence on his development of rational emotive behavior therapy. Ellis would often use direct quotes from Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius in his sessions and writings, seeing them not as historical artifacts but as practical therapeutic tools. He understood that a quote like Marcus Aurelius's, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it," was a powerful, concise way to deliver a core therapeutic insight. This integration of Stoic wisdom into modern practice demonstrates that these are not merely abstract ideas, but time-tested techniques for resilience that continue to hold immense practical value for people struggling with anxiety, depression, and stress today. Another profound parallel exists between the Stoic drill of Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of evils, and the modern therapeutic technique known as exposure therapy. Both are built on the same fundamental psychological principle, that systematically and safely confronting feared scenarios reduces their power to provoke anxiety. In Premeditatio Malorum, an individual would vividly imagine a worst-case scenario, such as losing their job or experiencing public humiliation, and then visualize themselves navigating it with stoic composure. This mental rehearsal served to desensitize them to the fear of the event, making it familiar and manageable rather than shocking and overwhelming. Exposure therapy operates on an almost identical mechanism. A person with a phobia of elevators, for example, doesn't just avoid them. Under the guidance of a therapist, they gradually and repeatedly expose themselves to the source of their fear. They might start by just looking at an elevator, then standing in one with the doors open, then taking a short ride, and so on. Each controlled exposure weakens the neural pathway of panic and strengthens a new association of safety and control. The key to both practices is that the confrontation is done in a deliberate, structured way. The Stoic doesn't just worry uncontrollably about potential disasters. They set aside dedicated time to examine them rationally. Similarly, in exposure therapy, the client doesn't simply endure random bouts of anxiety. They follow a carefully constructed hierarchy of fears developed with their therapist. In both cases, the individual moves from a position of passive dread to active engagement, transforming the feared object or event from a terrifying unknown into a manageable challenge. This process builds what modern psychologists call distress tolerance and what the Stoics would have called fortitude, proving that this method for building emotional resilience is both ancient and scientifically validated. This remarkable convergence of ancient philosophy and modern science invites an exciting possibility for your own personal development. You don't necessarily need to be in formal therapy to begin benefiting from these time-tested Stoic exercises. They are accessible, self-directed tools for building psychological strength. Consider starting with the very practice we just discussed. The next time you find yourself feeling anxious about an upcoming event, a difficult conversation, a presentation, a travel plan, instead of trying to suppress the worry or getting lost in it, try a structured session of Premeditatio Malorum. Set a timer for 5 minutes, close your eyes and vividly imagine the worst-case outcome unfolding in detail. Then, crucially, visualize yourself navigating that outcome with calmness, rationality, and virtue. What would your Stoic ideal self do in that situation? How would they breathe, speak, and act? This isn't about inviting pessimism. It's about inoculating yourself against fear by familiarizing your mind with adversity in a safe space, turning anxiety into preparedness. Pandemics, wars, and famines, ancients faced them with stoic calm, not because they were unfeeling, but because they had meticulously trained for those precise moments. In the crucible of a genuine crisis, the abstract principles of philosophy were forged into the steel of practical necessity. A society's survival often hinged on the collective emotional resilience of its people, and the ability to maintain rational clarity when the world was falling apart was the ultimate measure of one's training. It was during these extreme tests that the true life-or-death value of emotional stability was revealed, transforming it from a personal virtue into a communal lifeline. We have a profound window into this mindset through the writings of Seneca, who experienced political exile and navigated the treacherous court of Emperor Nero. During his banishment to the harsh island of Corsica, stripped of his wealth, status, and comforts, he wrote letters that are masterclasses in applying Stoic principles to profound personal crisis. He didn't deny the difficulty of his situation. Instead, he reframed it. He saw exile not as a punishment, but as an opportunity to test his self-sufficiency and to realize that his true worth was internal and could not be taken from him by any external decree. He wrote, "A man is as wretched as he has convinced himself that he is." His focus wasn't on the external circumstances of his exile, but on his internal judgment of it. By refusing to see himself as a victim, he transformed a potentially soul-crushing event into a period of immense philosophical productivity and inner strengthening, proving that our emotional response to a crisis is the one thing we can always control. History provides stark examples of this principle operating on a massive scale. Consider the Antonine Plague, which ravaged the Roman Empire around 165 AD, during the reign of the Stoic Emperor Marcus Aurelius. This was likely a smallpox outbreak that killed millions, perhaps as much as a third of the population in some regions. The empire faced not only mass death, but also economic collapse and military vulnerability as legions were decimated. In the face of this unimaginable catastrophe, Marcus Aurelius did not retreat into hedonism or despair. His actions, as recorded in history and reflected in his personal meditations, were those of a leader applying his philosophy under the most extreme duress. He oversaw emergency measures, funded funeral rites for the poor from his own treasury to prevent civil unrest, and continued to govern with a steady hand. His emotional stability provided a crucial anchor for a terrified population. He couldn't stop the plague, but he could prevent a societal collapse fueled by panic, demonstrating that a leader's composure is a critical public resource during a crisis. This same Stoic equanimity was essential for navigating the frequent financial panics that shook the ancient world. The Roman economy was prone to sharp disruptions caused by harvest failures, piracy disrupting the grain supply from Egypt, or sudden changes in imperial fiscal policy. A merchant who had invested his entire fortune in a shipping venture could see it vanish overnight due to a storm or a price crash. The untrained mind would react with utter despair, perhaps leading to ruinous decisions driven by fear or simply giving up entirely. The Stoic merchant, however, was trained for this possibility. Through practices like Premeditatio Malorum, he had already mentally rehearsed such a loss. This didn't make the financial blow painless, but it removed the element of devastating surprise. His training would guide him to immediately focus on the aspects within his control, assessing what capital remained, exploring new opportunities, adapting his business model, and maintaining his network of contacts through his dignified composure. His emotional stability directly protected his ability to recover and rebuild, turning a personal crisis into a manageable setback. This ancient approach to crisis management offers a powerful mirror for our own modern experiences. We may not face invasion by Carthaginian armies or the Antonine Plague, but we collectively navigated a global pandemic, and we regularly face personal crises of health, finance, and loss. The Stoic question is not whether we avoid these events, but how we choose to meet them. When the world seems to be spinning into chaos, the Stoic impulse is to contract your focus, not expand it. Instead of being overwhelmed by the terrifying, global scale of a problem, you train yourself to ask, what is the very next small, right action I can take? What is within my control at this exact moment? This might mean focusing on caring for your own health during an illness, supporting a vulnerable neighbor during a lockdown, or simply making a calm, rational plan for your family's safety instead of succumbing to the frantic energy of the crowd. So let's hold that mirror up for a moment. Think about the last major crisis you faced, whether it was a global event that affected everyone or a deeply personal struggle. How did you respond? Was your reaction primarily driven by the shock and fear of the circumstance itself, or were you able to access a sense of inner steadiness? Did you find yourself expending energy on things far beyond your influence, the actions of politicians, the opinions of others, the relentless bad news cycle, or were you able to channel your efforts into the small circle of your own agency? The goal of this reflection isn't to judge your past self, but to understand where your emotional training currently stands. It helps you identify the gap between the reactive person you might have been in that crisis and the responsive, stoic ideal you are working toward, providing a clear direction for your practice so that when the next storm arrives, you are not swept away by the waves but can stand firm, knowing you have already learned to navigate the tempest within. For Stoics, mind and body were not separate projects to be worked on in isolation. They were a single, integrated system trained together for resilience. This holistic understanding stands in stark contrast to many modern approaches that often treat mental health as purely a cognitive or emotional concern, divorced from the physical vessel that houses our consciousness. The ancient Stoics recognized that a neglected or indulged body could become a source of distraction, discomfort, and ultimately, emotional turbulence. By willingly subjecting the body to controlled discomfort, they were not engaging in masochism. they were performing a vital form of training that built a fundamental tolerance for the inevitable hardships of life. They understood that mastering the body's impulses for comfort and pleasure was the foundational practice for mastering the mind's more complex impulses for approval, security, and avoidance. The Stoic teacher Musonius Rufus, who was known for his very practical and accessible teachings, spoke directly to this necessity of physical training. He argued that it was impossible to develop a virtuous and stable mind without also developing a body capable of enduring effort. He stated plainly, how could a person who is not in training to withstand cold and heat, hunger and thirst, be able to endure the hardships that virtue demands? His point was that every time you choose to step into a cold shower, or skip a meal intentionally, or push through the fatigue of physical labor, you are doing far more than just building physical endurance. You are engaging in a live fire exercise for your willpower. You are proving to yourself in a tangible, undeniable way that you can endure discomfort without collapsing, that you can feel an urge and choose not to obey it. This direct, somatic experience of self-mastery then becomes a reference point you can call upon when facing psychological discomfort like anxiety, rejection, or frustration. The body's resilience becomes a metaphor and a muscle memory for the mind's resilience. We can see this philosophy embedded in the very architecture and daily rituals of ancient Roman life. The Roman bath complex, for instance, was not merely a place to get clean. It was a designed environment for holistic training. A typical visit involved moving through a series of rooms with drastically different temperatures, from the frigid cold of the frigidarium to the intense, dry heat of the laconicum and the steam of the coldarium. This wasn't just about hygiene or relaxation. It was a deliberate practice in physiological and emotional regulation. Bathers were training their bodies and minds to remain calm and composed amidst sudden and extreme sensory changes, building a visceral tolerance for volatility. Similarly, the palaestra, or public gymnasium, was a space where young men engaged in wrestling and other physical contests. The primary goal wasn't necessarily to become the strongest athlete, but to learn how to handle both victory and defeat with grace, to endure physical strain without complaint, and to maintain focus and strategic thinking even while exhausted and under pressure. The body was the anvil upon which the disciplined mind was forged. This integrated approach extended far beyond the elite. The vast majority of people in the ancient world experienced physical hardship not as a chosen exercise, but as a constant feature of daily existence. Tilling fields, hauling water, walking everywhere, and living in homes without climate control meant that physical discomfort was a normal part of life. The Stoic innovation was to reframe this unavoidable reality. Instead of merely enduring these hardships with resentment, they encouraged people to embrace them actively as opportunities for training. The farmer could see his back-breaking labor not as a curse, but as a daily session in the gym of virtue, strengthening his patience and fortitude with every swing of the hoe. This mindset transformation turned every moment of physical effort into a purposeful exercise in emotional building. This ancient perspective invites an uncomfortable but important question for our modern, comfort-optimized lives. How much of our daily routine is designed to systematically eliminate all physical discomfort? We have climate-controlled homes and cars, effortless access to abundant food, and labor-saving devices for nearly every task. While these advancements are not inherently bad, they have inadvertently created an environment where our tolerance for any kind of discomfort, physical or emotional, can atrophy from lack of use. We then become more vulnerable to life's inevitable irritations and setbacks, reacting with disproportionate distress to a minor inconvenience like a slow internet connection or a room that's too warm. The Stoics would argue that by removing all physical challenge, we have disarmed ourselves in the battle for emotional stability. So let's turn that question inward. Looking at your own life, can you identify ways in which you might be neglecting the physical foundations of your mental steadiness? Do you seek constant comfort, avoiding anything that feels too cold, too hot, too strenuous, or too hungry? This isn't a call to abandon modern conveniences, but to consider intentionally reintroducing small, manageable doses of physical challenge into your routine. It could be as simple as taking a brisk walk in cooler weather without bundling up excessively, opting for a few minutes of strenuous activity when you feel tired, or occasionally skipping a snack and sitting with the feeling of hunger for a short while. The goal isn't to punish the body, but to reacquaint it with its own innate capacity for resilience, to remind yourself through direct experience that you are far more durable than your comfort-seeking impulses might lead you to believe, building a physical bedrock for the unshakable mind you are striving to create. Stoicism taught how to handle victory without pride and defeat without despair, cultivating an unwavering inner equilibrium regardless of the external outcomes that life might deliver. This wasn't about suppressing the natural joy of an achievement or the natural sadness of a loss. It was about refusing to let those events define your self-worth or disrupt your inner peace. The Stoics practiced a profound form of emotional aikido, using the energy of both good and bad fortune not to throw them off balance, but to reinforce their center of gravity. They achieved this by making a crucial distinction. They learned to be entirely invested in the quality of their own efforts and intentions, which were always within their control, while remaining largely indifferent to the results themselves, which were often subject to countless factors beyond their control. Your virtue, your character, your integrity, these were the only true goods. Everything else, praise, wealth, promotions, wins, losses, criticism, were merely preferred or dispreferred indifference. They could be used virtuously, but they were not good in and of themselves. This nuanced perspective is beautifully articulated by Marcus Aurelius, who, despite being the most powerful man in the known world, constantly reminded himself of the fleeting and fickle nature of external success. In his Meditations, he writes, "The memory of everything is very soon overwhelmed in the gulf of eternity." He would counsel himself to view applause, victory, and popularity with the same detached clarity as he viewed criticism and defeat, seeing both as ephemeral weather patterns that would quickly blow over the landscape of his life. For Marcus, the real victory wasn't in conquering a foreign tribe. It was in conquering his own ego, his own desire for acclaim, and his own fear of failure. He understood that a win could be just as dangerous as a loss if it inflated his pride and made him forget his own humanity and fallibility. His goal was to remain the same man in the imperial palace as he would be in a simple cottage, because his identity was rooted in his character, not his circumstances. We can find powerful modern examples of this Stoic equilibrium in the world of elite athletics. Consider a world-class tennis player like Novak Djokovic, who often speaks about the importance of detaching his self-worth from the outcome of a match. After a devastating loss in a major tournament, a non-Stoic athlete might be crushed by despair, seeing themselves as a failure. A Stoic-informed athlete like Djokovic would certainly feel the natural disappointment, but would then quickly refocus on what was within his control, analyzing his performance objectively, identifying areas for technical improvement, and recommitting to his training regimen. Crucially, he would also apply the same principle after a major victory. Instead of basking in the glory and letting it define him, he would see the win as a data point, a positive outcome resulting from preparation and execution, and would almost immediately turn his attention to the next challenge, knowing that yesterday's trophy does not guarantee tomorrow's success. His emotional stability comes from being process-oriented, not outcome-dependent. This philosophy is equally vital and perhaps even more challenging in the volatile arena of politics. A politician who is attached to victory will be destroyed by defeat, likely becoming bitter and resentful. Conversely, a politician who becomes attached to the accolades and power of victory may grow arrogant and lose touch with the very people they serve. A Stoic approach, though rare, would look different. A candidate could campaign with immense effort and integrity, wholly invested in the process of making their case to the electorate. But on election night, whether they win or lose, their core identity remains unshaken. A loss is not a personal annihilation, but a change in role and opportunity. A win is not a validation of their soul, but a new set of responsibilities to be handled with humility and duty. Their equanimity allows them to serve effectively in either outcome, because their purpose is rooted in service itself, not in the title that enables it. This invites a deeply personal reflection. Look back over the past few months at your own endeavors, both large and small. It could be a project at work, a personal goal, a creative pursuit, or even a social event you planned. How attached were you to the specific outcome? When you succeeded, how did you process that success? Did it inflate your ego, making you feel superior, or did you accept it with gratitude and a quiet understanding of its temporary nature? Conversely, when you faced a setback or failure, how did you respond? Did it lead to a crippling sense of self-doubt and weeks of rumination, or were you able to feel the sting, extract the lesson, and move forward without letting it write the story of who you are? Our level of attachment to results is often the hidden puppet master of our emotional lives, and the Stoic practice of loosening those strings is perhaps one of the most liberating skills we can cultivate for long-term peace and resilience. Rituals, from funerals to festivals, trained emotions collectively in the ancient world, serving as a kind of communal gymnasium for the soul where entire societies could practice and reinforce emotional stability together. These were not merely social events or religious obligations. They were highly structured, repeatable ceremonies designed to channel powerful, often chaotic human feelings, grief, joy, fear, pride, into a shared and socially constructive experience. In a world without therapists or self-help books, these rituals provided a vital container, a sanctioned space and time where individuals could process complex emotions without being overwhelmed by them, guided by tradition and supported by their entire community. This collective practice normalized emotional experiences, reminding everyone that grief in the face of death or awe in the face of the divine were universal human responses, and that navigating them with a degree of composure was a skill to be learned, not an innate trait. This mindful participation in tradition is something Seneca touches upon in his writings, though not with a direct prescription. He observes the importance of engaging with cultural practices not as a mindless follower, but as a conscious participant. He suggests that we should partake in the rituals of our ancestors not out of superstition or empty habit, but as a way of connecting to the larger human story and regulating our own place within it. For Seneca, a ritual was an opportunity to practice perspective, to remember the cycles of life and death, the fleeting nature of earthly glory, and the enduring strength of community. By stepping into a ceremonial role, whether at a funeral or a festival, an individual was essentially rehearsing a virtuous response to life's biggest moments, building emotional muscle memory that could be drawn upon when faced with personal adversity outside the ritual space. We can see this powerful emotional conditioning play out in two starkly different yet equally effective ancient ceremonies, the Roman triumph and the Greek tragedy. A Roman triumph was the ultimate spectacle of victory and power. A conquering general would parade through the streets of Rome with his army, displaying spoils of war and captive enemies to the roaring adulation of the entire city. On the surface, this was pure celebration, but layered within this ritual were profound psychological mechanisms to prevent the intoxication of success. Standing directly behind the general in his chariot was a slave whose sole duty was to hold a golden crown over the general's head while whispering in his ear, "Remember, you are mortal." This was a deliberate, institutionalized practice of cognitive detachment at the moment of peak glory. The entire city could revel in the victory, yet the central figure was being conditioned to remember the Stoic truth that this external acclaim was fleeting and separate from his inherent worth. The ritual allowed for the expression of national pride while simultaneously inoculating the leader against the hubris that could destabilize both him and the Republic. In contrast, Greek tragedies performed in vast open-air theaters served as a kind of mass exposure therapy for the entire polis. Audiences would gather to watch plays depicting the most horrific human experiences: betrayal, murder, madness, and divine punishment. They would collectively witness characters like Oedipus or Agamemnon be broken by fate and their own flaws, and they would experience a catharsis, a purging of pity and fear. This was a safe space to confront the darkest possibilities of life from the distance of the stage. By voluntarily immersing themselves in these narratives of suffering, citizens were not indulging in misery, they were emotionally fortifying themselves. They were rehearsing how to respond to catastrophe with dignity, exploring the consequences of uncontrolled passions, and ultimately reaffirming the importance of wisdom and moderation as a community. It was a ritual that made them more resilient, not more fearful. These ancient examples challenge us to look at our own modern lives through a ritualistic lens. Much of our emotional processing today happens in isolation, scrolling through social media, binge-watching television, or ruminating alone on our worries. We have largely abandoned the shared, structured ceremonies that once provided a healthy outlet for our collective emotional energy, so consider your own routines. What rituals do you have, either alone or with others, that help you process the full spectrum of human emotion? Do you have a consistent practice for marking a loss, or do you simply try to power through the grief? Do you have a way to celebrate an achievement that also grounds you in humility, like the Roman triumph? Perhaps your ritual is a weekly phone call with a friend where you truly unpack your week, a daily walk in nature to reset your mind, or even the intentional act of cooking a meal for your family. The form is less important than the function. Identify what in your life currently serves this purpose, and consider whether you might want to be more deliberate about creating a small ritual, a personal or shared ceremony that provides that same ancient gift, a structured way to feel deeply without being lost in the feeling, to process your emotions rather than be processed by them. The words ancient Stoics used reveal a deep and precise understanding of emotional stability, framing it not as a vague feeling but as a tangible state achievable through linguistic discipline. Their vocabulary itself was a toolkit for mental clarity, with specific terms carving out nuanced distinctions that our modern language often blurs. Consider the profound difference between the Greek word pathos and the Stoic ideal of apatheia. Pathos referred to a harmful, excessive passion, a destructive wave of emotion like blind rage or consuming envy that overthrew rational judgment. Apatheia, often mistranslated as apathy, was not about feeling nothing. It meant freedom from these specific negative pathei. It was the state of having a clear, untroubled mind, free from the storms of irrational passion. perfectly capable of experiencing positive and prosocial feelings like joy chara and caution eulabia. This precise terminology gave people a target to aim for. It wasn't about eliminating emotion, but about surgically removing the unhealthy ones. This careful use of language extended to how they described their internal world. The Stoics made a crucial distinction between an initial involuntary feeling and the conscious judgment they then attached to it. They might feel a first flash of anger, an impression they called a fantasia, but their training was in not giving assent to that impression. They would label it for what it was, using their precise emotional vocabulary, and thereby create a gap between the stimulus and their response. Epictetus demonstrates this masterfully when he advises, "Don't let the force of an impression when it first hits you knock you off your feet. Just say to it, 'Hold on a moment, let me see who you are and what you represent. Let me put you to the test.'" This act of talking to the emotion, of interrogating it with language, was the very mechanism of cognitive detachment. They didn't say, "I am angry," which fuses identity with the feeling. They might say, "A feeling of anger is present," which objectifies it and makes it something to be examined and managed. This philosophical precision was woven directly into the fabric of public life through the art of rhetoric. In the Roman Senate or the Athenian Assembly, a leader's emotional stability was demonstrated through their command of language. Speeches were crafted not to whip up hysterical emotion in the crowd, but to project calm authority and rational conviction. Cicero, one of history's greatest orators, argued that the most persuasive tool was a logical argument delivered with a composed and dignified presence. A speaker who used inflammatory language, shouted, or stumbled over their words under pressure was seen as weak and unreliable. Their lack of verbal control betrayed a lack of emotional control. In contrast, a statesman who could articulate a complex point with clarity and measured tone, even when delivering dire news or a fierce rebuttal, inspired confidence. Their language was the proof of their composure. This principle was equally vital in personal correspondence. The letters of Seneca and Marcus Aurelius are not emotional diaries. They are exercises in applied linguistic restraint. They wrote to console, advise, and strengthen themselves and others, deliberately choosing words that would instill peace rather than amplify anxiety. In a letter to a grieving friend, Seneca wouldn't say, "This is a catastrophic loss that will ruin your life," even if that's what the friend felt. He would use language to reframe the event. "This is a difficult loss, but it is a part of the human experience we all share. Let us consider how to endure it with virtue." The words themselves were selected to guide the emotional response downward from panic to a manageable, though still difficult, sorrow. The medium of the letter allowed for this deliberate choice of words, free from the heat of a live conversation. This ancient attention to language holds a powerful mirror to our own modern speech patterns, which are often rushed, reactive, and emotionally charged. We tend to use absolute, catastrophic language for minor inconveniences. We say, "This traffic is a nightmare," or "My boss is going to kill me," or "I'm devastated about that mistake." While these are common figures of speech, the Stoics would argue that the words we choose to describe our experience directly shape that experience. Catastrophic language amplifies stress and makes challenges feel insurmountable, while precise and measured language helps contain and manage our emotional responses. So for the next 24 hours, make it a small, private experiment to simply notice your own emotional vocabulary. Listen to the words you use internally and externally when something doesn't go according to plan. Do you immediately reach for the most dramatic term available? Do you describe a setback as a disaster or a mild criticism as an attack? See if you can gently shift your language towards something more precise and less charged. Instead of thinking, "This is a complete disaster," you might try, This is a challenging obstacle that I need to navigate. The event hasn't changed, but the words you use to frame it will directly influence your emotional and physiological response, creating a little more space for the calm and reason you need to effectively address it. Stoics knew emotional mastery was a journey, not a one-time achievement. They understood that building a resilient and steady mind was a project that spanned an entire lifetime, requiring daily recommitment and endless refinement. There was no graduation ceremony, no final exam where you were declared perfectly stable for the rest of your days. Instead, they saw it as a continuous path of progress, where each day offered a new opportunity to practice, to stumble, to learn, and to inch closer to that ideal of unshakable wisdom. This perspective transformed the inevitable failures and setbacks from signs of personal inadequacy into essential data points on the map of growth, each one revealing a new area that needed strengthening. The goal wasn't to reach a finish line, but to enjoy the quality of the walk itself, to find a sense of purpose and engagement in the very process of becoming a better, more composed version of yourself. This profound respect for the role of time and experience in building character is a recurring theme in Stoic writings. Seneca, in his letters, often reflects on the value of a long life, not for the accumulation of years, but for the accumulation of wisdom. He observes that while youth may be strong and passionate, it is often untested and reactive. It is through the repeated trials of life, the losses, the disappointments, the unexpected joys, and the slow grinding down of ambition, that a person truly develops depth and steadiness. He suggests that we should venerate age not for its wrinkles but for the scars of battles fought and won within the mind, for the hard-earned equanimity that can only be forged in the fires of lived experience. An elder, in the Stoic view, was a library of resilience, someone who had faced the myriad forms of fortune and had learned, through practice, how to remain upright in any storm. We can see this value placed on lifelong learning in the legendary figure of Cato the Younger, who became a symbol of Stoic integrity for generations. What's often overlooked is that Cato's unwavering composure in his final years was not a sudden personality trait. It was the culmination of a lifetime of deliberate practice. From his youth, he was known for his severe self-discipline, his choice to walk through Rome barefoot in all weather, and his simple mode of dress. These weren't just eccentricities, they were the daily reps in his lifelong workout for emotional fortitude. Each small act of denying an impulse for comfort, each moment of choosing principle over popularity, was like depositing a coin in his resilience bank. By the time he faced his ultimate test, choosing suicide over submitting to the tyranny of Julius Caesar, his calm was not a performance. It was the natural expression of a character that had been meticulously, daily constructed over decades. His final act was simply the last repetition in a lifetime of training. This cultural reverence for the wisdom of age created a powerful social feedback loop in ancient societies. Elders were not sidelined, they were sought out for counsel precisely because of their proven emotional stability. Their value was in their long perspective. A young person might see a business failure as a world-ending catastrophe, but an elder who had survived multiple economic collapses could view it with calm detachment, as a temporary setback in a long life full of cycles. Their equanimity was a tangible resource for the community, a living example that hardships could be endured and that emotional turbulence did, in fact, settle with time and practice. This respect gave younger people a compelling reason to invest in their own emotional development. They could see the personal and social rewards that awaited those who dedicated themselves to the long path of self-mastery. This stands in such contrast to much of our modern culture, which often prioritizes the energy and innovation of youth while subtly dismissing the aged as out of touch. We have largely lost this structured veneration for the emotional wisdom that comes only with time. Our models of success are frequently the young prodigy or the rapid unicorn startup, narratives that imply achievement should happen quickly and early. This can create a hidden anxiety, a feeling that if we haven't achieved perfect control over our lives and emotions by a certain age, we have somehow failed. The Stoic view liberates us from this pressure. It reassures us that the work is never done, that there is no deadline for mastery, and that every stage of life offers unique and valuable lessons in resilience. So consider your own perspective on growth. Do you see your efforts to become more patient, less reactive, or more courageous as a finite project with an end goal? Or can you begin to see it as an endless and rewarding practice, much like tending a garden that is never finally finished but can become more beautiful and nourishing with each passing season? What if you measured your progress not by the absence of difficult feelings, but by your changing relationship to them over the years? Perhaps you recover from disappointment a little faster than you did 5 years ago. Maybe you listen more calmly to a contrary opinion than you could have last year. These subtle shifts are the true milestones on the lifelong journey of emotional stability, a journey that doesn't end but only deepens, offering richer peace and greater strength the further you choose to travel. Stoics found freedom by embracing fate. This might sound like a complete contradiction. How can surrendering to the forces you cannot control possibly make you free? The answer lies in their brilliant redefinition of freedom itself. For the Stoics, true liberty was not the power to shape every external circumstance to your will. That was an impossible fantasy that led only to frustration and misery. Real freedom was the unimpeachable inner capacity to choose your response to any circumstance, no matter what fate delivered. It was the unshakable knowledge that while the world could dictate the events, it could never dictate your judgment of those events. By fully accepting the former, you could focus all your energy on mastering the latter, which was the only form of control that was ever truly, completely yours. This profound balance is beautifully expressed in the concept of amor fati, a Latin phrase that translates to a love of one's fate. While the term itself comes from a later philosopher, the idea is pure Stoicism. Marcus Aurelius constantly circled back to this theme in his private writings, urging himself not just to grudgingly endure what happened, but to welcome it. He wrote, "A blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything that is thrown into it." His instruction was to be that fire, to take whatever life gave him, the praise, the slander, the peace, the war, and use it as fuel for his own virtue. This wasn't passive resignation, it was active, enthusiastic cooperation with the reality of the universe. He wasn't saying, "I guess I have to put up with this." He was saying, "This is the material I have been given to work with today, and I will use it to create something good." We can find a more poetic, earlier expression of this surrender to a rational universe in the Hymn to Zeus by Cleans, the second head of the Stoic school. The hymn is a powerful prayer that acknowledges Zeus as the divine reason, or logos, that guides the entire cosmos. Cleans writes, "Lead me, O Zeus, and thou, O destiny, the way that I am bid by you to go, to follow I am ready. If I choose not, I make myself a wretch and still must follow." This is the ultimate expression of the Stoic interplay. The universe has a path, fate is unfolding according to a grand, rational plan. Our only choice is whether we will walk that path willingly, with grace and understanding, or whether we will be dragged along, kicking and screaming as a wretch. The destination is the same, but the quality of the journey, the freedom or the bondage, is entirely up to us. History provides us with stunning examples of individuals who thrived not in spite of their constraints, but by using them as the very foundation for their freedom. Consider the life of Epictetus himself. He was born a slave, his body literally owned by another person. By any external measure, he possessed almost no freedom whatsoever. His master could beat him, chain him, or sell him on a whim. Yet, through his dedication to Stoic philosophy, Epictetus discovered a realm of inner liberty that no master could ever touch. He realized that while his body was enslaved, his will, his character, and his judgments remained his own. He famously is said to have told his master, "If you chain my leg, you will not chain my mind." His physical bondage became the very condition that forced him to explore and claim this inner sovereignty, making him one of the most influential teachers of freedom the world has ever known. A more modern example of this principle can be found in the life of Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor whose work deeply resonates with Stoic thought. Frankl was stripped of everything in the Nazi concentration camps: his home, his possessions, his family. His very identity was reduced to a number. He observed that in those unimaginable conditions, the Nazis could control nearly every aspect of his external existence. But they could not control his internal response. He wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." Frankl found meaning and a reason to live even in the depths of hell by exercising this final freedom. He chose to find beauty in a sunset, to offer comfort to a fellow prisoner, to hold onto the memory of his wife. His embrace of his horrific fate did not mean he approved of it. It meant he refused to let it destroy his humanity. He used it instead to discover a profound truth about the human spirit's capacity for choice. This ancient wisdom invites a deeply personal application. Look at your own life and identify one significant constraint that you consistently fight against. It might be a physical limitation, a demanding family obligation, a frustrating aspect of your job, or even a global circumstance you cannot change. How much of your mental energy is spent resenting this reality, wishing it were different and feeling trapped by it? Now try on the Stoic framework of amor fati. What if you stopped fighting this particular fact of your life? What if you truly accepted it as the unchangeable landscape you have been given? From that place of acceptance, ask a new question. Within this reality, what freedoms of choice do I still possess? How can I use this very constraint as the raw material to practice patience, creativity, or compassion? The constraint itself doesn't disappear, but your war with it ends, and in that ceasefire, you discover a spaciousness and a peace you never knew was there. Many think Stoicism is about repressing emotions they're wrong. This is perhaps the most pervasive and damaging misconception about this ancient philosophy. The popular image of a Stoic is often a cold, unfeeling robot, someone who has walled off their heart and moves through life with a blank stare, untouched by joy or sorrow. But this caricature misses the entire point of Stoic practice. The goal was never to eliminate feelings, but to understand them, to engage with them intelligently, and to prevent them from hijacking your capacity for rational action. It's the difference between being swept away by a raging river and learning to navigate its currents with skill. The Stoics weren't trying to drain the river dry, they were building a boat and learning to steer. This crucial distinction between healthy engagement and unhealthy numbness is articulated perfectly by Seneca in his essay, On the Happy Life. He draws a clear line stating, "The wise man is not passionless, but he is free from unprofitable and hurtful passions." His choice of words is incredibly precise. He doesn't say the wise man feels nothing. He says the wise man is free from the specific passions that are unprofitable and hurtful, the kind of emotions that cloud judgment, lead to destructive actions, and cause prolonged suffering. For Seneca, a sudden feeling of grief at a loss was natural. What was to be avoided was the prolonged, self-destructive wallowing that could consume a person. A flash of anger at an injustice was a signal to act virtuously. A sustained rage that poisoned one's thoughts and relationships was the hurtful passion to be released. The Stoic ideal was a mind clear enough to feel deeply without being disabled by those feelings. We can see the stark practical difference between Stoic practice and emotional suppression by comparing two people receiving devastating news, say, the loss of a job. The person who is merely suppressing their emotions might outwardly appear stoic. They might stiffen their upper lip, tell everyone I'm fine, and refuse to talk about it. Inwardly, however, they are a whirlwind of unprocessed panic, shame, and fear. This internal pressure will inevitably seek an outlet, perhaps through sudden irritability with their family, unhealthy coping mechanisms, or even physical illness. They are not calm, they are a pressure cooker with the valve sealed shut. In contrast, a person practicing Stoicism would first acknowledge the initial, visceral punch of the news. They would allow themselves to feel the shock and the disappointment fully, recognizing these as natural human reactions, but then they would engage their rational mind. They would apply the dichotomy of control. This event has happened. It is now in the past and outside my control. What is within my control? My response. My next steps, my attitude. They might then channel the energy of their disappointment into updating their resume, reaching out to their network, or simply taking a mindful walk to process their thoughts. One approach is about pretending the emotion doesn't exist. The other is about acknowledging it and then choosing what to do with its energy. This misconception likely arises because we live in a culture that often conflates emotional expression with emotional health. We are encouraged to let it all out, with the assumption that any suppression is inherently toxic. While expressing feelings is vital, the Stoics would argue that how and why we express them matters more. Venting rage uncontrollably might feel cathartic in the moment, but it often escalates conflict and damages relationships. The Stoic alternative isn't to bottle it up, but to create a moment of pause, to examine the root of the anger. Is it based on a slight to my ego? Is it a reasonable response to an injustice? This process of examination often takes the heat out of the emotion, allowing for a response that is measured and effective rather than explosive and regrettable. It's the difference between screaming at a colleague who overlooked your contribution in a meeting and later requesting a calm, private conversation to ensure your work is recognized moving forward. So let's turn this lens on our own preconceived notions. When you hear the term emotional control, what is the first image that comes to your mind? Do you see it as a positive form of self-mastery, or does it carry a negative connotation of being cold, disconnected, or inauthentic? Have you ever mistaken someone's calm demeanor in a crisis for a lack of caring, when in fact it might have been their way of being most useful? And perhaps most importantly, can you identify a time in your own life where you suppressed an emotion to avoid dealing with it, versus a time when you felt a strong emotion fully, but still chose a response that aligned with your long-term values? Unpacking these personal definitions can be the first step toward reclaiming emotional stability, not as a form of repression, but as the ultimate practice of thoughtful, authentic engagement with the full spectrum of human experience. You don't need an ancient society to measure your emotional growth. The tools for building that inner stability are just as available to you today as they were to a Roman senator or a Greek merchant 2,000 years ago. The core principles of Stoicism are timeless because they address the fundamental mechanics of the human mind, and with a few simple adaptations, you can apply these ancient measures to your modern life starting right now. Think of it not as adding more to your plate, but as changing how you hold the plate you already have, building a steadier grip so that when life inevitably shakes it, fewer things spill. One of the most straightforward ways to begin is by borrowing a modern tool for an ancient purpose, the practice of self-observation. While the Stoics used papyrus and ink for their evening reflections, you can use the device in your pocket. Numerous mood-tracking apps are designed to help you log your emotional states throughout the day, noting what triggered a spike of anxiety or a moment of calm. This isn't about narcissism, it's about data collection. By tracking your mood for just a few weeks, you will likely start to see clear patterns emerge. You might notice that your frustration peaks every Tuesday afternoon before a certain meeting, or that your patience is thinnest when you've skipped your morning quiet time. This data provides an objective measure of your emotional landscape, turning the vague feeling of being stressed into a specific, trackable pattern that you can then address with targeted Stoic practices, like applying the dichotomy of control to that Tuesday meeting long before it even begins. This modern self-tracking pairs perfectly with the ancient Stoic concept of setting personal benchmarks. The philosopher Epictetus advised his students to adapt the teachings to their own circumstances, saying, "If you didn't learn these things in order to cure your anger, your grief, your envy, your ambition, then what did you learn them for?" He was pointing to a measurable outcome. You can do the same. Don't set a vague goal like be calmer. Set a specific, observable benchmark based on a recurring stressor. For instance, your benchmark could be, the next time my commute is derailed by a traffic jam, I will measure my success not by the speed of the traffic, but by how quickly I can acknowledge my frustration and then shift my focus to an audiobook or a podcast I enjoy. Your benchmark isn't never feeling frustrated. It's reducing the duration and intensity of that frustration through conscious intervention. That is a tangible, ancient measure of progress. Technology can also play a role in creating the kind of community support that was so vital to ancient practitioners. While you might not have a local Stoic school to attend, you can find accountability partners online. This could be a friend who is also interested in personal development, or a dedicated online forum or social media group focused on practical philosophy. The key is to move from private contemplation to shared journey. Just as a student of Musonius Rufus would have their actions gently corrected by a teacher, you can ask your accountability partner to help you notice your blind spots. You might agree to send each other a weekly message summarizing one instance where you successfully applied a Stoic principle and one where you fell short. This external perspective provides a mirror that is often far more accurate than our own self-perception, turning a solitary struggle into a shared project of growth. Finally, the most powerful way to bring these ancient measures into your life is to commit to trying just one Stoic practice for a single month. The key is to choose one and practice it with consistency, not to overwhelm yourself with a complete life overhaul. You might choose the evening reflection, spending 5 minutes each night asking yourself Seneca's questions about what you cured and what you resisted. You might choose the morning premeditation, mentally rehearsing the potential challenges of your day to remove their sting. Or you might focus on the dichotomy of control, making a literal list each morning of what is and isn't within your power to solidify the distinction in your mind. The practice itself matters less than the commitment to the measurement. At the end of the month, the measure of your success won't be a perfect scorecard. It will be the subtle but undeniable sense that you are a little less rattled by external events, that the space between a trigger and your response has grown just wide enough for a breath and a choice, proving that emotional stability is not a trait you are born with, but a skill you can actively build one deliberate day at a time. Stoic emotional training left a lasting mark on Western culture, weaving its way through the centuries like a quiet, steady undercurrent beneath the louder tides of history. While the Roman Empire itself fell, the philosophical framework for building an unshakable mind did not crumble with it. Instead, it was preserved, adapted, and rediscovered by thinkers and movements that shaped the modern world, proving that the human need for resilience is timeless. This enduring legacy shows that our current fascination with mental strength and emotional intelligence isn't a new invention, but rather a rediscovery of an ancient art repackaged for a new age. We can see this thread begin to re-emerge powerfully during the Renaissance, a period that looked back to classical antiquity with fresh eyes. Renaissance humanism, with its focus on human potential and individual virtue, found a natural ally in Stoic thought. The ideal of the balanced, self-possessed individual who could navigate the complexities of courtly life and intellectual pursuit mirrored the Stoic ideal of the sage. Figures like the Dutch scholar Erasmus admired Seneca's letters, and the French philosopher Michel de Montaigne, whose essays founded a whole new literary form, filled his pages with quotations and ideas drawn directly from Stoicism. They saw in these ancient texts a guide for living a meaningful life based on reason and self-awareness, rather than purely on religious doctrine, helping to lay the groundwork for a more secular approach to personal ethics. This thread was pulled even tighter during the Age of Enlightenment, when reason was elevated to the highest principle for understanding both the natural world and human society. The Stoic emphasis on governing one's life through rational judgment rather than through unchecked passion or superstition resonated deeply with Enlightenment thinkers. The philosopher Baruch Spinoza, though operating within his own unique system, arrived at a conception of God and the universe that echoed the Stoic logos, and his ethical writings champion a form of intellectual love toward a deterministic universe that is deeply reminiscent of amor fati. Similarly, the founder of modern economics, Adam Smith, who is so often associated with cold self-interest, was in fact a moral philosopher who wrote a whole book on the theory of moral sentiments. In it, he explores ideas of empathy and self-command, drawing explicit inspiration from the Stoic ideal of the impartial spectator, the idea of observing our own actions with the calm, detached eye of an outsider to ensure we are acting virtuously. This influence didn't stop with the great philosophers. It trickled down into the very bedrock of the modern world. The founding fathers of the United States, particularly Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, were avid readers of Stoic philosophy. They saw in the figures of Cato and Seneca models of republican virtue, civic duty, and resilience against tyranny. The Stoic ideal of maintaining composure under pressure, of prioritizing the good of the republic over personal ambition, and of enduring great hardship for a noble cause provided a philosophical blueprint for leading a revolution and building a new nation. The emotional stability of its leaders was not a personal matter but a political necessity, and they consciously cultivated a Stoic demeanor to project strength and rationality in the face of incredible uncertainty and conflict. In our own time, we are witnessing a remarkable resurgence of these principles, though they often appear in the modern garb of cognitive psychology and the wellness movement. The explosion of interest in Stoicism over the past decade isn't a coincidence. It's a direct response to the overwhelming complexities, anxieties, and distractions of 21st century life. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy, as we've discussed, stands on Stoic foundations, and the popularity of practices like mindfulness meditation shares a clear kinship with the Stoic focus on present-moment awareness. The flood of books, podcasts, and online communities dedicated to practical Stoicism speaks to a deep, widespread hunger for a proven operating system for the mind, a way to cut through the noise and find a center of calm and purpose. Today's Stoics aren't necessarily scholars in robes. They are entrepreneurs using negative visualization to manage business risks, athletes using obstacle mental rehearsal to enhance performance, and parents using the dichotomy of control to maintain patience amid the beautiful chaos of family life. This 2,000-year journey from the porticos of Athens to the apps on our phones reveals something fundamental about the human condition. The specific challenges change. We worry about social media notifications instead of barbarian invasions, but the underlying struggle to manage our internal world amidst external chaos remains constant. The Stoics identified the core mechanisms of that struggle and offered a timeless set of tools. Their legacy is not a dusty museum exhibit but a living tradition, continually rediscovered because it meets a perennial human need. It's a testament to the fact that while we cannot control the flow of time or the march of history, the essential project of building a resilient self is one that every generation must undertake for itself. So as we've journeyed from the bustling forums of ancient Rome to the quiet reflections of our own modern lives, the core message remains strikingly clear. Emotional stability is not a gift given to a lucky few, but a skill that can be deliberately trained, measured, and mastered by anyone willing to put in the work. For the ancients, this wasn't a vague self-help concept. It was a concrete part of education, a measurable standard for leadership, and a daily practice woven into the very fabric of society. They understood that a steady mind wasn't about avoiding emotion, but about engaging with it intelligently, using reason as a rudder to navigate the powerful currents of human feeling without being capsized by them. This historical perspective reframes our entire understanding of inner peace, transforming it from a passive state we hope for into an active construction we build, brick by brick, through consistent practice. The timeless tools they developed for this construction are just as relevant and perhaps even more necessary in our complex world today. The dichotomy of control remains the ultimate filter for mental clarity, helping us pour our precious energy only into what we can actually influence. The practice of premeditating challenges inoculates us against the shock of adversity, while the discipline of daily reflection turns our own experiences into a personal textbook for growth. And let's not forget the profound power of community, the ancient understanding that we sharpen our resilience best not in isolation, but alongside fellow travelers on the same path, offering each other the honest feedback and encouragement needed to see our own blind spots and celebrate our progress. Seneca, who faced exile and immense political turmoil, left us with a powerful image that captures the entire Stoic endeavor. He wrote, "A sword never used to combat is kept bright and free from rust. If it has been buried long in the ground, it is taken out covered with brown decay." The mind also is like that. When it has given itself up to inactivity, it is not merely inactive but becomes rusty. His words remind us that our inner fortress isn't built by hiding from life's storms, but by continually engaging with them. It is in the active practice of confronting difficulty, examining our judgments, and choosing our responses that we polish our character and keep our minds bright, strong, and ready for anything life may bring. Your journey toward this kind of unshakable stability begins not with a massive overhaul, but with a single, simple question. How will you start to measure your own emotional growth? Will you take 5 minutes tonight for an evening review, asking yourself where you succeeded and where you can improve? Will you choose one recurring frustration this week and practice applying the dichotomy of control to it, focusing solely on your response? The measure isn't perfection, it's awareness. It's the conscious decision to become the author of your emotional life rather than a character being written by external events. If these ancient ideas resonate with you and you're ready to explore more ways to build a life of strength, purpose, and calm, consider subscribing to this channel for more practical Stoic insights. And I would truly love to hear from you in the comments below. What is one small step you plan to take to train your emotional stability? Sharing your intention can be a powerful act of commitment, and your thoughts might just provide the spark of inspiration for someone else on their own journey. Thank you for watching, and remember, the power to build your inner fortress has been within you all along.